Well, I want to have you do a little exercise. We learned that if you just sit and listen to me all the time, you don't learn as well as actually when you practice some of this. And so, because listening skills were such an important part of coaching, I definitely want you to practice that in person. So here is the exercise. Groups of 3. One of you is going to be a coach. One is going to be the client, which we would call the person being coached. And the other will be an observer. And I want you to, the coach to ask, the question isn't as important, it's just an opportunity for you to do this. If you had 2 hours free, what would you do with it? And maybe take a minute or two on doing that. And I gave you some options just so you didn't sit there staring at each other. So there would be things like maybe reading a book, watching TV, a movie, go for a walk in the gym. And then I want the coach to use the listening skills. And you all have the piece of paper? Actually, the person who's doing the coaching, I want you to turn that piece of paper over and don't look at it. Okay? So you decide who's going to be the coach of all 3 of you. I don't want the coach to be looking at it. You have to remember what I taught you. And so the observer is going to keep track on that piece of paper whether you're using, which of those listening skills that you're using. Okay? So you all decide who's going to be the coach, who's going to be the person being coached, who's going to be the observer, and then that observer is going to listen and make notes while 2 of you are being coached and listened to. So as you ask that question, there's going to be some opportunities for you to respond and to go back and forth and perhaps. So it isn't just ask the question and then you get an answer and you're done. You're going to be taking it further. So let's see how well I did in teaching you on that. And you guys just have fun doing that. Part of the reason for this, I want you to feel what it's like to be coached. I want you to feel the difficulties perhaps and the fun that there is in coaching. And the observer's got it easy. I want to get some feedback from you on that exercise. The exercise was meant for you to maybe feel uncomfortable, at least see what, how you would feel if you were being coached, whether you had a good coach or not. Those who are doing the observing sometimes learn the most because they're watching both sides. But tell me how you felt, those of you who were coaching, how did you feel that you were doing, and were you able to apply some of the skills that you had learned? How did you feel that he did in listening? Did you feel listened to?
Yeah, he definitely used a lot of cues.
Okay, and did you see that too? Okay, so any other things you guys learned from it?
He asked me a couple of questions, but I think they were tied to what I was telling him. And we only have 1 minute, so I think he's being smart on himself.
So based on what you said, he was responding to that with questions. That's a good idea. How about you guys in the back? Any?
I was a coach, and I waited a little bit longer for him to say something instead of asking the next question.
Okay, I noticed that. There was a long pause there after you asked the question. So just from what we talked about, you learned that one. That was good.
And then he, I don't know, in one instance or something. Yeah.
What was that?
I said I finally answered.
Oh, you finally answered. Did you feel interrogated by him asking the questions, or were they?
No, not at all. Yeah, he did a good job.
Okay, yeah. Good. And the observer on there, anything you saw that was important?
Just engaging him, and asking him what gets him excited about mountain biking, and
okay.
And you know why he would choose that, and you know.
So he saw some excitement in something, and then carried that a little further. And we'll cover that a little bit more in the questions. How about you girls up here?
I try to wait a little longer too. I find myself almost interrupting her sometimes, so.
So you saw some of those previous problems you had in listening, at least you had to fight against those. Is that what I'm, waiting a little longer when you wouldn't have done that? Okay. Good.
Because she still had something to say, and I was like jumping in and go, wait, she's still talking.
Okay. So this exercise was valuable for you to experience what you normally would do, and then say, oh wait, I want to do that a little differently. Good. Okay. We'll do some more things when we talk about questioning. So I'm going to spend a little time now on how to ask questions. And that will tie in, that will help some of the things you ran into here. So, the principles of asking questions. I have been using some Bible examples. Let's look at a Bible example on asking questions. Remember when Jesus, actually after Adam and Eve had sinned, God came down to the garden and asked, Adam, where are you? Well, did God know where Adam was? So, ask necessarily to get find out something you don't know, is it? In fact, if you think about it, does God ever have to ask a question? He knows the answer, doesn't he? So asking the question isn't necessarily because you don't know the answer. Asking a question is maybe for different reasons. It may be for a person to know you really care. When God came down looking for Adam and said, where are you? Immediately Adam knew that he could still be accepted. God still cared. He had not been ignored. So asking questions has more reasons than what we might think. A question opens up a partnership of discovering our world in new ways. It guides the discussion too, doesn't it? If I just sat around waiting for someone to say something, I've got to ask a question to be engaged. And it starts a partnership to go on. Here's some things that asking a question does. It recognizes who the real expert is. And you say, wait, if God was asking the question, who's the expert? Adam was actually the expert on the issue that God was asking the question about. When I talk to somebody in coaching, what if I start giving advice on what they should do? They have lived in their skin longer than you have. They know what the issues are that they are confronting. They know what they've tried and they failed with. Why wouldn't I ask them for their input on their solution? They are really the expert. So asking a question, recognize that they are who the expert really is. Asking opens the door to exploration and self-discovery. They might know but haven't been thinking about it. So I may ask a question and it gives them a chance to look into their brain and their heart a little bit more than they would otherwise. Asking says, I care about you and I value your insights. And many times as a professional or someone who has the answer, someone who's trying to fix something, often it's like, okay, I've got the answers for you, and I don't need any input from you because you've been failing anyway, so I'm going to tell you how to do it right. Well, that's a little exaggeration. None of you would do that. But we value their insight. And then the last one, asking moves people to take responsibility for change. If I'm just giving the answer, I'm not really giving them responsibility. When I ask them, they are now responsible. And then, and as I mentioned before, many times when we become, say, a counselor, which isn't what coaching is, then they become dependent on us. Oh, I've got to call Sue because she's going to solve my problem. I don't know what to do. But when a coach helps, you realize you have the answer and that your input is important, then pretty soon you trust your own judgment and can start making decisions on your own in a very valuable way. Proverbs has a good insight on that. The purpose of a man's heart are deep waters, but a man of understanding, a coach, a man of understanding draws them out. Now that's interesting too, because as you think about a man of understanding, he must have answers. Why do I have to get anything from them? But the man of true understanding is the one who wants to find out from you. And there were several quotations in the Bible that have questions. Let's look at some of those. And by the way, while you're looking at these, do you know what an open-ended question is? It's one that can't be answered with yes or no. Now, when we do coaching, we are taught don't use closed-ended questions. They just say, how are you? Fine. Do you want this? Yes. Or no. And so we're taught don't use those kind, but you'll actually see God using one here, or Jesus. And so let's look at some of these. Where are you? Like, here I am. It's like, here I am. Do you still care? I'm hiding from you. Why are you hiding? In Luke 9:24, but who do you say that I am? When you think about these, the other neat thing I see about Jesus' questions, we call them bullet questions. It's not a long dialogue. It's short, concise, little questions that require some thought. What do you want me to do for you? And that's a very good question for a coach. How can I help you? Tell me about your need and how I can help you with that. Luke 22, why are you sleeping? He could have just said, wake up, but it was, why are you sleeping? Now that has a lot to it when you think about it. It wasn't just, is it just because you're tired? Didn't you know? This would be a closing question. Didn't you know I needed you to help me? Why are you sleeping was actually a much more powerful question to ask than just, don't you know that I need help? The answer would just be, yes. Closed. Here's a closed-ended question, actually, Simon, do you love me? However, he kept asking the question, didn't he? In other words, a single word answer included a lot more to it. This one here still made him think, and more than just the answer. And what do you seek? What do you want? One of the things about asking questions is very seldom do we use the word why in asking a question. The reason is it's a little bit more condemning. Why did you do that? We ask more questions like what and do you, and those kind of things. Now I'm going to give you another example, an idea about closed-ended questions. I used to think that you couldn't ask those. Well, obviously Jesus did, so it's probably okay. As I was teaching the class with the group who were doing the blood pressures in the store, it dawned on me that the first context we have with people before we know them, a closed-ended question is more comfortable because it doesn't ask them anything personal. It doesn't get in very deep. And so if I ask a person, was your blood pressure high? Has that been a problem? Those are both closed-ended questions. But see, that person didn't come into the store and want to have a long conversation with anybody. They came and they were just going to get some milk or something, and they thought, oh, I'll get my blood pressure taken while I'm there. They're in a hurry. Closed-ended questions are okay for short context. But when we ask these little questions, then we can tell, do they sit down? Does it look like they want to go into that a little bit deeper? And it gives me an opportunity to then ask open-ended questions that might be more personal. So don't get the idea we can never use closed-ended questions. Typically, for first connections, they make a lot of sense. But they don't do that well as a coach who wants to get to know more about what your needs are. So a good question helps a person take responsibility for change. It clarifies what it is that they want to do. Again, I'm going to ask questions that will clarify. Maybe I didn't understand something. I'm going to ask a question to get it a little bit more concrete. It connects to their motivation for change. You know, how motivated are they to change? And I wouldn't know that without asking some of the different questions. And it moves them into taking action. What's preventing you from starting an exercise program? Can we look at some of the things that are obstacles? See, that's going to actually move them into action instead of just talking about it. But dig a little deeper and help the person with whom you are conversing to see their path more clearly. Many times a person who has not achieved what they want to is because somewhere they've got the answer, but they haven't really spelled it out. They haven't really written out even what their dream is. It's kind of in their mind, but they've never put it down as the dream, and then here's the steps to get there, and that's what we do in coaching, is to allow them to clarify their goals. Use what and how questions. It keeps the client in charge of the agenda. We don't ask the why too often. It's positive and non-judgmental. These are the same principles we talked about earlier in coaching. It keeps the conversation open but not shut. When you think about a closed-ended question, I see it as similar to how a teenager learning to drive a stick shift would be. You know, where you'd stop and go and stop and go, and a series of closed-ended questions takes the conversation you ask the question, they answer it. That's the end of that little process. We ask another question, they answer it. We ask an open-ended question, it flows. And they continue to talk about it. Also, if certain ways we ask questions, we start making a person feel like they're being interrogated. Just someone sits there and you keep throwing questions at them. It's not very comfortable after a while. And that's why we do reflection. You ask a question and someone says something, instead of me then bringing another question for them to answer, I tag on to their answer. So you see how you ask the question, they give an answer. If I tag on to it, see how it flows? And then I add to that, and the whole conversation flows, where if I ask a question and then I don't relate to that one, it's starting over again. Another question, another response. So the flowing and where I'm actually reflecting on what they say, I'm responding to that, makes it smoother, more comfortable. And the more we can make a person comfortable in our discussion and stuff, the happier they're going to be to spend time with us. We don't want our questions to be critical. Listen openly without judgment, not to convince or control the individual. There again, we have those tendencies sometimes. We're trying to get them to change. We're trying to get them to move, and so we ask these questions like, well, what were you thinking anyway? that's a question that is not going to be very productive, is it? But it's kind of more a critical one. There to discover and to become aware, and arguing for change often promotes resistance instead of role-playing. Here's something I want to share with you. I was riding on the train, and there was a young man who was, as we started talking, I found out that he was a scientist, and he was really into evolution, and obviously he was also a atheist. As we talked, we discovered that he had been in a home as an exchange student in a Christian home. Well, that was kind of an experience for him, because here he's an atheist and he had to be involved with his family, and so he told us he was congenial and so forth, but he said he still didn't want anything to do with this religion stuff. And it seemed like, if I remember right, at the end of when he was leaving, his host, it was even like, well, if you don't believe in Jesus, you'll go to hell, or something like that. I don't know if it was that strong, but it was kind of that type of a thing. So I was using some of my coaching skills, and there was another person with me who started drilling him on evolution. Well, that can't be true because of this, and haven't you read this, and so forth, and trying to prove the evolution. And I don't know if we were trying to prove God or not, but because of what I learned in coaching, I realized that he had had a whole year of information, didn't he? About God and creation and those type of things. He had a whole year of that. Information was not what he needed. But isn't it interesting that that's what we try to do? We're trying to prove something to him. And in my mind, I realized that what he really needed is to see a revelation and a reflection of Christ's character. And I thought, maybe he didn't see that for that whole year. So what he doesn't need is more information. As we talked to him, as I thought about the coaching elements that you reveal Christ's character, I thought, well, let's reveal his character through the questions we ask, through the listening that we do, so that we care about him in this discussion. He may see something he never saw for a whole year, but he doesn't need more information. And as I listened to the other person drilling him on these things, I saw myself in the past doing that same thing. Oh, I've got to convince him. I've got to give him the information. I've got to correct him. And it was, I guess, refreshing in my own mind just to realize, as I finally caught on to what our role really is, that he needed to see something different. And it wasn't just more information. Wow, we need to learn, don't we? How we reveal Christ. In listening. And actually, I did mention as we were talking, I said, it's interesting how some things we can say will cut off a conversation. Where when we say, tell me more. And in fact, I asked the young man, I said, if I ask a question, it isn't because I'm trying to trick you or to fool you, but I really would like to know how people think in that line, because it's different than my thinking. I'd like to listen and learn from you. And so it gave us an opportunity to grow, but it just woke me up to what we typically are doing. And I think we do that in our evangelism too. Let me prove to you these facts, when really what they need to see is Christ's character, and say, I like that, what I see. And when they're approved facts, they leave the church too, much more quickly. But when they have a relationship with a person and with God, they're not going to give that up. Yes, thank you.
They don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
They don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Yeah. Love that.
Yeah.
You know what? We don't care about who God is until we know how much he cares. We could have all the information about him, and who cares if he doesn't really fit into my life and care. I appreciate you sharing that with us. Arguing for change often promotes resistance. So when we try to argue for something, the resistance comes up even more, and that's exactly what was happening. I could just tell. The guys say, here's these Christians again, these creationists, and I don't want to talk to them. Instead of rolling with the resistance and keep listening. Characteristics of powerful questions. And when we talk about these are powerful questions. And they're typically, like I said, little bullet questions, so to speak. What resources do you have? In other words, we're exploring. And when I talk to somebody with exercise, I'm going to say, do you have any exercise equipment? Oh yeah, I've got this down here, and yeah, I've got those. So now at least we have information that might help. How will you track your progress? In other words, you said you wanted to reach this dream. How will you know that you are making progress on that? Well, I guess if I walk a little bit more each day, I'll be working toward that. I'll feel stronger. Okay, I'll keep that in mind. In what other ways might you look at that situation? So you're asking questions that are exploratory. Another characteristic of powerful questions is taking ownership, such as, what can you do? What have you felt God leading you to? And this would be a spiritual aspect of that. And the other characteristic here is going deeper. And we had experience that. Didn't you experience that when you were doing the listening? You're going deeper. Tell me more about that. That's always an important part. You mentioned such and such. Tell me more about that. See, when you learn a couple of these simple principles, you see how it could help you in that conversation? And as you're listening to that person, you say, I need to know more. Yeah, Rick said I had to ask those questions, and I need to reflect on what they're asking. And so sometimes it is a effort to do good listening and good questions, but it will become more and more natural for you. How does this action fit into your values? In other words, what you just described that you're doing, is that going to help you reach your dream? Not my dream, your dream. You have the dream. I'm just helping you see, is that going to help you? And they'll say, well, I guess not. And say, well, is there something you would do that would help with that? So you're asking those questions and guiding them. What did you learn about yourself this past week? Is another question as we call them up each week. This is important to realize that you as a coach don't know it all, do you? And you would realize that, hopefully, right away. But we stay focused on the other person and open to the Holy Spirit. When you are listening and asking questions, realize you kind of have this kind of a arrangement. I'm getting information from God through the Holy Spirit. I'm listening to this person and asking for that help. And I'm that intermediary that God needs for Him to share with me, and I'm listening to that person. And I think those are valuable principles that we can do. Stay curious. Tell me more. More observations. I noticed that you did such and such. I think we've covered that one. And this is we're ready for actually a little practice, and that may be just about right. Let's do that. The next one we're going to cover is support, which is the Holy Spirit's role. And so that's actually fairly short, even though it's a powerful one. But what I'm going to do is to have, because we have 5 minutes, to have you practice questions. So I have some handouts I'll get for you. And in the meantime, I'm going to have you break into those 3 groups, or you can mix it up if you want to. But you're going to be in 3s. One of you is going to be asking the question. He's the coach. And I'm going to have you switch. So whoever was the coach before, it's going to be, I'll let you decide who's going to be. And you're going to have an observer, which you learn a lot as an observer too. But I'm going to have you ask some questions this time. And you get your groups together while I get you the piece of paper, okay? Question, little exercise on asking questions. You were the coach.
She was like, I was asking questions that I expected a longer answer, and she was like, short answers.
Oh, they were short little answers.
So I sort of like formulated the question again in a different way to try to get.
Did you feel that he was tricking you to get? Oh, see, so you felt manipulated. Be careful of that.
Well, that was my wife.
It was okay. If it's your wife, you can manipulate.
That's why I was like, sometimes, okay, I know what you're thinking, so I was trying to.
Okay. So you wanted just do short answers. He wanted a little bit longer, and but you know what you will probably find is you'll find different ways, and you were practicing that. You had different ways to ask the question. Now, if he had asked that better way the first time, he wouldn't have to keep asking it. So with experience, you'll know how to ask the question, perhaps to get a longer answer that would meet your need. Or,
So I failed the exercise.
hmm?
So I failed the exercise.
No, you didn't. You learned something, didn't you? How did they do?
I just realized they're married.
Oh,
No, I know that, but yeah.
you couldn't tell by the conversation.
Yeah, because he was giving advices right away. So.
He was giving advice.
Yeah.
Okay. See, that's why we do this, because just listening to me talk about giving advice is one thing. The other thing is when you actually practice it and someone mentions that, that'll stick in your mind a lot longer than we would have done. Any ideas back there, you guys?
I observe, you know, Jared would ask the question and Chris would talk and talk. He didn't need a whole lot of priming.
Okay. So
Yeah.
sometimes you
So
get a
speak
good
it, yeah.
you get a good person that you're coaching, and sometimes you get a difficult one.
Yeah.
And so you have to realize that sometimes you get stuck with someone who's not going to answer, and you have to have the skills to make that work.
Yeah, it was interesting though, because even though there was only one obstacle, as a coach, we could have gone deeper and deeper into
Okay.
possible solutions and
So that one
more
obstacle.
causes for the obstacle.
And did you ask him about what solutions, or did you give him the answers for the solutions?
No, he gave me the answers. Pretty
Good.
much, yeah.
Good. Okay. So that was the point, is when you're asking the questions and so forth, you can use questions for that person to learn the answer and the solution. I think that's really helpful to do that with questions. How'd you girls do? Anything particularly you learned?
I realized that I like to talk fast, especially in Hungarian. And it's hard.
You talk fast, you said?
Yeah, in Hungarian especially. And for me it's hard to decide when they are talking slower or I should ask more questions, because I like to talk fast.
So you want the conversation to be going faster?
Yeah,
I was processing kind of slow.
Okay.
but no, it's like normal speed, so I should slow down.
You know, that's a really good point, is when we have two different personalities, you have to start moving into that person's speed and what they're comfortable with. And that's hard for us to do because in our routine. And as we start moving into, when we listen to someone, if we find them processing a little slower and talking slower, we start becoming more like them and talking slow as well. I notice this happens when I'm in Texas or somewhere. You start talking with a drawl too. You know, when you're talking to someone, you start picking up some of the same things that they're doing. And that's actually helpful as long as they don't think you're making fun of them by doing it. But I like that idea that you brought up, is that you were aware that you were talking fast and she was responding slower. We start changing and moving. They're the person that you're there for. Let's take a break.